Alright, it's time to rate every episode of Victorious. I tried this a few years ago, 4 separate videos for the 4 seasons of Victorious, but in the end, most of those episode ratings came down to me saying this select episode didn't focus on the main character Tori enough, so it's bad, or this episode wasn't about a girl trying to fit in at a performing arts school, so it's bad. So I just had to revisit this show and rate every episode again properly without enforcing such a strict and limiting criteria. Not to say that some of that stuff won't be factored in some, but it's not going to be the only thing that matters. This time around, episodes will be rated on an A through F grading scale for more variation than the smile, neutral, and frown system, and these ratings will be decided based on how much I like the episode. The 3 seasons of Victorious will be covered. Most places have it as 4 seasons, but the 4th season is just the second half of season 3, and those episodes were never intended to be an actual season 4. So the 3 seasons of Victorious will be covered along with the iParty with Victorious crossover special. All right, it's time to get in here. Victorious Season 1, Episode 1, Pilot. It's the pilot episode. Shocker. Anyways, it's about Tori finding her talent, which is singing, and because of this, she got accepted into Hollywood Arts, and this episode was about her first 2 days there, trying to get used to the environment. No intro for this episode, but the theme song was taken care of in the Hollywood Arts Showcase event, Make It Shine. It's not the version of the song that's ingrained into my brain, but it's a solid song. Something that wasn't solid, or at least a bit questionable, was when Tori asked to speed the performance up. That should have just ruined everything, assuming the slow version of the song was the version that everyone practiced for. Anyways, this was an episode that, although it gave an introduction to all of these memorable Hollywood Arts characters, I've got to say that Jade and Tori took this episode over. I laughed out loud when Jade asked why Tori was rubbing her boyfriend. And yeah, the whole back and forth between them in the acting scenes was fun, especially seeing Tori come out on top in the end. But just because I like that, it doesn't mean that I'm just going to completely take Tori's side in this Tori versus Jade feud. I saw that this was a big point of controversy, so I'm just going to talk about it while I'm on this episode. Firstly, I believe that Jade was wrong for freaking out about Tori rubbing coffee off Beck, but fine, she reacted how she reacted. But she completely went overboard when she made Tori act like a dog and poured coffee on her. Entertaining, but it's messed up. But although I like Tori getting revenge on Jade, that doesn't make it right. They both had a role to play in that drama. Also, I gotta absolve Beck from criticism here. Tori asked for a kiss and he's an improv. He can't really say no easily. And maybe a kiss on the cheek, but yeah, that's a tough situation to get out of. But yeah, this was totally an A-tier episode, a very strong way to start off the series. Episode 2, The Bird Scene. The A plot for this episode was about Tori trying to pass the bird scene so she can participate in plays. Also, she had to figure out how she was going to decorate her locker, while the B plot focuses on Andre and Robbie in their ballet class, to which I didn't care about that stuff at all. This episode is really relying on the bird scene to make up some ground. Sadly, the bird scene and all of Tori's performances were boring. Outside of some of Jade's reactionary comments when it came to hating on Tori, there wasn't that much entertainment in this episode. It's just Tori performing a scene and going around pressuring her friends into telling her the secret of the bird scene. So that's going to limit the grade that this episode is going to get. But before I get to the grade, I want to comment on the bird scene. I once thought that this was an amazing episode that taught a valuable lesson, but now I'm realizing that it's flawed. The way that it's set up, where to pass, you have to revolt against the teacher and stand up for your work, that makes sense. But what about shy kids or non-confrontational people that don't have it in them and they aren't going to go through that hassle? Also, I know they tried to have this believe in yourself and follow your dreams conclusion, which is nice to hear, but it doesn't always pan out that way, especially in entertainment. Believing in one's work is important, but if you want to have an audience, you're going to have to take a bit of constructive criticism and maybe adapt some. I know what they were going for, but now that I think about the premise of the bird scene, it just wasn't as deep as I thought it was. Anyways, this episode is going to get a B-. It was a funny episode at points, but the two plots that they had to offer just didn't really come through. They weren't the best. Episode 3, Stage Fighting. In this episode, there's this big stage fighting project and Tori gets paired up with Jade, so Tori is worried about that, and rightfully so, considering all of the drama. Then for the B plot, it was about Trina kissing Robbie for a stage kiss, but Robbie took it seriously and fell in love with Trina and started stalking her. Yet another B plot that fell flat, so the A plot has to carry, and I can say that it accomplished that. The whole stage fighting storyline was so fun, with Tori getting in trouble for hitting Jade, but then it got exposed that Jade faked the injury. When I was watching Victorious in 2020, I heard a lot about Jory, but I just never saw that. But at the end of this episode, when Jade came back and helped Tori scrape food off of the wall and they started dancing together, I totally get it now. Like, yeah, there could be something there for sure. But yeah, the main thing that I like about this episode and these earlier episodes is the emphasis on performing arts rather than singing. Like, as the show goes on, this improv and stage fighting, or really anything that's not singing, is going to take a backseat, which is unfortunate because it's a performing arts school, not just exclusively a singing school. So I like that this episode was able to show off a different side of Hollywood arts. Stage fighting is an A- tier episode that only gets held back by the B plot. Episode 4, The Birth Week Song. In this episode, Tori stressed out about getting Trina a present for her birthday, birth week, and for the B plot, it's about Robbie and Kat trying to help Robbie's grandmother with the internet and the grandmother having this one-sided beef with Kat. Finally, there's a B plot that doesn't drag the episode down with how boring it is. I loved it, especially when Robbie's grandmother called him at school while he was giving a presentation and embarrassed him. Good fun. And the A plot has always been one of my favorites because it had a good song performance in You're the Reason, and Trina was so funny when she was trying to figure out where her present was. Speaking of that, I have to get to another controversial point within the show, which is, was Tori's birth week song to Trina an actual present? Well, first, Andre put Tori in a backpack and carried her in the songwriting portion, so it's more like their song. But I've got to say that Tori is right in this situation. It's a good message that they're trying to push that gifts aren't always material objects, and actually the gift that Tori got Trina was probably more valuable and had more thought put into it than just buying those shoes that she wanted. Also, I can't say that Tori showing off her talent to Trina is disrespectful and rubbing her talent in Trina's face on her birthday, because Trina is deluded into thinking that she's talented, so Trina probably didn't even take it on that level. Like, she was more concerned with the material, the money, rather than Tori rubbing her talent in her face. So yeah, I'm on Tori's side for this. But yeah, the episode overall is going to get an A+ for sure. Never a dull moment, and they had an amazing song performance. Episode 5, Jade dumps Beck. Well, this episode is self-explanatory. Jade dumps Beck. I've never been a fan of their relationship, and this episode just showcases why. There's Jade just being really weak and really fragile, saying that Beck can hang out with ugly girls, but he can't hang around girls that would challenge Jade. Understandable feeling, but That's so controlling. She has to trust in her relationship that she built with Beck, and if that doesn't hold through, then it just wasn't meant to be. I really don't like Jade in this situation, but I can't let Beck off the hook for continuing to go back to her, even though he knows her game inside out. But despite being a toxic couple, I actually enjoyed their storyline in this episode, and it was nice to see another side of Jade when she wanted Beck back desperately, and she and Tori teamed up for this episode. But the B plot, despite having the famous Chicago song from Trina, I didn't really care about it much, and every time that it was on, I didn't like that it was taking away from Jade and Tori. But nice cameo appearance from Spencer, Jerry Trainer, I've got to say. This episode is going to get an A-. Episode 6, Tori the Zombie. In this episode, when Kat gets an ugly mask stuck to Tori, she and Trina have to rush to get the solvent and take it off of Tori's face before her performance at the school play. Trina and Kat really made this episode like they were a chaotic pairing when they were in the car screaming at people and eating ice cream and singing 5 Fingers to the Face. Like, they were so much fun. As for the acting part, it really picked up when they started the play and performed a really good song in Finally Falling. The in-show version is better than the studio album version because it has Beck's lines and Andre's piano solo. Also gotta add in, this isn't gonna affect the quality of this episode, but I remember a few years ago, I was talking to one of my friends and he said that Beck sliding on the ground in this episode was the most adventurous thing he ever did in the show. And when I saw that moment, I just couldn't stop replaying it and laughing. It's not necessarily 100% accurate because of the existence of this one episode that's coming up later, but yeah, it's not far off from the truth. But yeah, A+ episode. I like how the plots are interwoven and it's not like the Birth Week song episode with Tori trying to make a song. Then there's Kat and Robbie trying to fix Robbie's grandmother's internet with very little overlap. 2 completely separate plots. This was definitely a more cohesive episode for sure. Episode 7, Robberazzi. This episode was about Robbie having a failing blog, so he started embarrassing his friends to keep his blog and gain more popularity. He got influenced heavily by Rex in this, which was always confusing. When I was younger, I thought that Rex was its own thing, but no, Robbie's controlling him. Just something that I take into account when Rex is hitting on girls and stuff like that. Anyways, then for the B plot, it was about Kat buying a bunch of useless stuff. In my original rating video for Victorious, I gave this episode a bad rating because of my criteria and it not being Tori-centric, but this time I came in with an open mind. Its grade has gotten a little bit better, but I can't give it anything higher than a C+. The main plot and the side plot were lame. Only until the tail end when the Victorious group stood up to Robbie and embarrassed him. That's why it gets a plus tacked on to what's really a whatever episode of Victorious. Episode 8, Survival of the Hottest. In this episode, everyone goes to the beach to try and avoid the blistering heat. But when an RV gets parked right outside of Beck's RV, that locks them all in there and they're just going crazy, waiting for Kat to get back and save them. It was so fun to see everyone going crazy as the day went on, trying to share a small fan and take tongue dips on this small drop of water, and Robbie even drinking fish water. Like, I didn't really care much about what Kat had going on with these beach guys that she met, but I've got to say, everyone else really made this episode. That's the thing about Victorious. The best episodes are when everyone's all together, and that's what happened in this episode for the most part. Also, something that I actually found out when researching was that this episode premiered on the same day as iCarly's Heat-themed episode, I Beat the Heat, and other shows like True Jackson and Big Time Rush also had Heat themed episodes on this day. I never watched True Jackson, but I saw the big three of iCarly, Big Time Rush, and Victorious, and I didn't know that there was an event of sorts going on, and there was a little bit of correlation, so that's nice to know. But yeah, this episode is gonna get an easy A+. Episode 9, Wi-Fi in the Sky. In this episode, Tori was in an airplane, so she had to video chat with Andre, Beck, and Kat to finish up this script, but they kept on clowning around or getting interrupted. I said that the best episodes of Victorious are when everyone's together, which sort of happened in this episode, but with them meeting over Zoom or whatever, it just wasn't the same as them being there in person like in the previous episode. There was very little movement in this episode. It was mostly dialogue based, looking at them talking on the screen, which definitely affected this episode's rating. They weren't even funny. Random doesn't equal funny all of the time. Honestly, it felt like I was watching an episode of Pokemon Orange Islands, just filler, especially in comparison to every other episode so far. This definitely didn't have the highest quality. Like, this isn't even an episode that I'd wait for. Like, I'd be upset if I waited a week to watch this underwhelming episode. This episode got rated low in my original ratings and nothing has changed. It's gonna get an F. Episode 10, Beck's Big Break. In this episode, it's about Beck's big break. He gets this part in a movie with this big time actress, but he gets fired from the job when Tori stands up for him. So it's up to Tori to get Beck's job back. And for the B plot, it's about Robbie having nightmares about Rex. Once again, I don't like the B plot, and most of them have involved Robbie. He'd probably be better as like a fourth option in the A plot rather than getting to take the lead in all of these B plots. Anyways, there's not much that I have to say about Beck's big break other than it was a fine storyline, but there have been better storylines. The intrigue of what could have been is more interesting than the story itself. As the series went on, Beck got a lesser role, so I kind of wonder, since he ended up getting his part back, what if this was his way into the industry and he just kept on getting cast in other movies? Just a thought, but yeah, like I said, for what this episode was, it was a B tier episode. It was all right. Episode 11, The Great Ping Pong Scam. So this episode is about this fake ping pong team that the group started so they could get funds that the school gives to their clubs so they can secretly have a dinner at a nice restaurant, and this is their third year at it. Good to know that they're juniors and Trina's a senior, just to keep track of this stuff and see if the writers stay consistent. It's kind of insignificant, but when I was making character videos, I always wondered what year they were in canonically, just because, so it's good to know. Alright, so I love the whole explanation of this ping pong scam and how scandalous they made it sound. Like, that section just guaranteed this episode was going to get a good rating. But then when they got to the restaurant and Tori and Andre performed Tell Me That You Love Me to get out of their little situation when they had insufficient funds, that made this episode an A+ episode for sure. Also, I like the call to just have one plot and not bog the episode down with a filler B plot. The story was so deserving of a dedicated episode. The only real complaint that I have for this episode is the audience track interrupting the song like every 7 seconds, unfortunately, but that's not going to bring this episode down. Episode 12, Kat's New Boyfriend. This episode is about Tori being jealous of Kat being with her new boyfriend Danny, that is her ex-boyfriend. And for the B plot, it's the infamous foot episode where Trina got these fish that eat dead skin off of human feet, and she ran a whole operation in her house, and for like half of this episode it was just people talking about feet or feeling on feet. And this writing is post Quiet on Set documentary, just released last month at the time that I'm writing this. The foot stuff wasn't next level disgusting like some of the other things that I saw in similar Nickelodeon shows, but it was odd for sure. It definitely didn't feel like a real thought out storyline. It felt like an excuse to show as much feet as possible. So yeah, hopefully everyone that participated in the foot rubbing was okay with this then and now. Alright, so for years, I've heard that Tori is a bad character because she sprayed cheese on Kat and Danny and kissed Kat's boyfriend. I really wanted to defend Tori and take the angle of Kat saw that Tori clearly wasn't okay with them dating, but nah, I've got to say, this makes Tori look bad. She was the one that broke up with Danny, then she gave them the okay to date instead of saying that there was a problem when she had plenty of opportunities. But also, on the other hand, Tori and Danny both kissed each other at the same time, so maybe Tori unintentionally saved Kat from a bad boyfriend. That's the side that rarely gets mentioned. The guy wasn't in it for the long haul, like Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Even though Tori apologized, I can't help but feel like Kat got such a bad deal from Tori and Danny, but it was a nice ending to the episode, especially when Tori got punched in the face by Kat. So yeah, the love triangle and Jade egging Tori on in this episode was fun, and the foot stuff isn't a deal breaker. So yeah, this episode is going to get an A. Fun episode. Episode 13 and 14, Freak the Freak Out. I'm not going to rank both halves separately. This will just be rated as one whole episode. Same rules apply for the other specials. Alright, so in this episode, there's this new karaoke spot that everyone's going to, except for Tori because she has to take care of Trina because she got her wisdom teeth taken out. So while they're at the karaoke place, Jade and Kat got into some drama with these girls that are the daughters of the owner and they got banned, so it's up to Tori to get some revenge. The sections where Tori and the guys and eventually Haley and Tara had to take care of Trina were hit or miss. Sometimes they were funny, but sometimes they weren't. But the main storyline never disappointed. I like the Hollywood Arts versus Northridge aspect of this episode, whether it was Jade and Kat versus Haley and Tara, or Sinjin and Robbie getting robbed by some Northridge girls. This rivalry expands the world more, and it brings me back to my high school days when rivalries were a big deal. Just gonna say this right now, I wish that Northridge was utilized more instead of just being a joke, because this right here was good. Also, I've got to say, the episode really felt like such a special event. Like, there was just an abundance of songs and performances like Forever Baby, Number One, Give It Up, and Freak the Freak Out. Speaking of Freak the Freak Out, I really like the whole planning process when Jade and Tori had to put their differences aside and work together to come up with a plan and take down a greater evil. Like, the plot had high stakes for sure. But yeah, this episode just rarely dragged. There was no shortage of fun, and that's amazing for it being an extended episode. I always thought of this episode highly solely because of the Freak the Freak Out performance, but after watching it again, I've got to say it was the best part of the episode, but the episode overall is good, so it's definitely going to get an A+ grade. Good special. Episode 15, Rex Dies. In this episode, Tori accidentally gets Rex sucked into this turbo machine and he gets roughed up badly. This episode is gonna get a D. It's so boring. It's all about this puppet that's just not bringing much to the show. Like, whenever I made character rankings in the past, Rex has never been included because he's just not an impactful enough character to take up a spot. So I don't like the fact that this episode is all about him, and a lot of it takes place in a boring hospital. Just watching these guys go through all of this trouble for a puppet. Kat being brought into a mental ward was fun at points, but it's not enough to bring this episode up to a higher grade. But before I finish talking about this episode, I have to say what I think about Tori reviving Rex. When I used to defend Tori and say that she's a good character, this is one of the points that I'd use. She didn't want Robbie to be sad, so she revived Rex. But Jade also made a good point that Robbie will become a normal person if he ditches the puppet. So it's like two things can be true at the same time. Tori has a good heart for reviving Rex, but also in the long run, it's not good for Robbie's development as a person to keep on talking to a puppet. It's an interesting dilemma for sure, and it will come up again in the future. But yeah, like I said, D-tier episode, and it's really unfortunate that coming off of the peak of the season, or one of the peaks of the season, the show immediately goes to one of the lows of the season. Episode 16, The Diddly Bops. In this episode, Andre gets dropped from the record label that signed him because he performed this really kiddie song, and that's not the look that the label is going for. So the rest of this episode is about trying to get Andre signed again. This was a strong Andre episode for sure, where he dealt with the struggles of being in something as volatile as the music and entertainment industry, and the problem that he went through was a real deal thing that could actually happen. So I like that they were able to work that realism into this episode. And yeah, the performances in this episode were also nice. When I was in like 4th grade watching this, my absolute favorite song from Victorious was Broken Glass. It's gone down in my rankings over the years, but it's still a good song, especially the episode version when they were trying to come up with song ideas for children, and every few seconds, Robbie kept on interjecting with this Broken Glass song that no one liked. Also, they kind of made fun of the favorite food song with all of the laugh tracks, but the song was actually really good, especially Jade's performance in the song. But the best part of the episode was the performance of Song to You that Tori and Andre got to sing. It's such an amazing song. This episode is going to get an A+. The only negative that I have to say isn't about this episode specifically. It's just that I wish that they could have gone back to this record label in the future for more plots for Andre, but that's not going to affect this episode in any shape or form. No way. Episode 17, Walkstar. In this episode, there's only one plot. It's about Jade trying to put on her play, but the school wouldn't allow her to because they thought that it was weird and disturbing. But once she ended up getting funding for the play, she had to deal with all of these changes that were being made to her play. I've got to say that regardless of the content in this episode, it was getting at the very least a B because it's comedy gold. Now, I don't know if it's because I took a break from watching this show just to watch stuff like the Knuckles series and Velma season 2, and now like a week later, I'm coming back to Victorious with a fresh mind. But this episode is way funnier than the rest. Like, it was able to get legitimate laugh out loud moments from me at every turn, which is very rare. I'm not going to list every moment because that would basically be the whole episode. But the parts that I really liked were when this episode just started off wacky with a blooper of Tori almost dropping her laptop. And then at the end, when Jade and her father were having a stare down and Tori was like, just say whether you like the play or not. And the father was like, friend of yours? And Jade was like, and there's everything else in between. Like, this was such a funny episode, way funnier than I remembered it being. Like, a few years ago, I never would have been caught giving this much praise to Walkstar, mainly because there's no real song in this episode. But it's amazing that this episode was able to be so good while not having a song. And this point goes back to something that I mentioned earlier. The show started to become a singing show in the later seasons, so I like that season 1 has variety, considering that they're at a performing arts school for performing arts, not just singing. I also like how this episode shows the dangers of the acting and playwriting industry, especially on the amateur level. Like Miss Lee changing some of Jade's scenes and adding her daughter into the play. While I can't say that I've seen something quite like that firsthand, I've got to say that I know when the money isn't coming out of your pockets, sometimes you're at the mercy of someone else and compromises might have to be made. And like Tori even said in this episode, that's how show business works when Jade was getting mad at all of Miss Lee's antics. So yeah, I already talked about the amazing comedy, but outside of that, this was just a solidly structured episode. They only had one plot, so that's where all of the focus went. And yeah, it taught a good lesson. A+ episode for sure. Episode 18, The Wood. Interesting title there. Speaking of innuendo, this is the infamous episode where Trina got squirted with white stuff, so that's a thing. Anyways, this episode is about this reality TV series called The Wood that's set up at Hollywood Arts to film, which initially excites Tori, Beck, Andre, and Robbie. But when production edited some footage together to make it look like Beck was cheating on Jade, they hated it. But then they learned that nothing on reality TV is actually 100% real. And once they learned that, they went crazy with that. While for the B plot, Trina and Robbie injured Festus and they had to run his business until he got healthy. The B plot gave some fun moments, but really it all comes down to the A plot. When watching this, I couldn't help but notice the similarity to Robberazzi when Robbie was going around embarrassing his friends and getting popular from it. So it brings up the question, what's with the different reaction? Why was the group okay with giving production more content that doesn't necessarily paint them in the best light, but not for Robbie? My guess is because they were probably getting paid for The Wood and its larger scale, and production agreed to film some of their staged events. But yeah, I just couldn't help but notice the similarity. I like how this is another episode focusing on something other than singing, and it touches on a real issue that these Hollywood art students will have to face in their careers. I mean, just relating this to some of the reality shows that I watch, there's a show named Survivor where players have a lot to say in the post game because sometimes the edit misleads or leaves stuff out for dramatic purposes. Then there's something like Big Brother Canada that took away their live feeds relatively recently, and now they have a lot more control over the narrative that they would like to craft. So I liked how they touched on a real issue for these Hollywood art students. Also, this was yet another hilarious episode, which is actually surprising considering that they didn't even have Kat for this episode, someone that's always going to bring a good amount of comedy. So yeah, what was once ranked as a middle tier episode because of not having a song, it's actually going to get an A grade. Episode 19, a film by Dale Squires. This episode was about this famous director, Dale Squires, directing a film for the Hollywood art students, or so they thought, as they did all of the work while Dale took all of the credit. And for the B plot, it was about Beck fixing Robbie's car, which I initially wrote off, but it got good when Robbie was trying to impress some girls, but they sprayed him with a hose. For the A plot, it's similar to what I've been talking about for the past few episodes. Like, yeah, in their careers, they can run into a shady director, and it's nice to know how to take action against one. But I found this one to be more boring than the previous two episodes. Maybe it's because the section where they were filming the scenes was boring, or maybe it's because of the burnout from having watched two other similar episodes consecutively. But this episode was a fine episode, but there's nothing special about it, so it's gonna get a C+. It is a really mid and forgettable episode at the end of the day, and I've seen better out of this show. Episode 20, Sleepover at Psychowitz. In this episode, to enhance their method acting skills, Psychowitz challenges the group. They're going to pick out characters and have a sleepover at his house. The last person to stay in character wins. Why would the parents even agree to this? It's not disturbing, but it's something that I always thought about. Anyways, For the most part, this episode had very little substance and it was basically all comedy, with everyone playing these really exaggerated characters and flaming out in the funniest ways, like when Jade had to play a nice character, but when she touched a very hot tray, she lost it. Also, at the beginning of the season, an acting exercise was what got Tori into all of this mess and drama, so it's nice to see her be victorious in this episode in yet another acting exercise. So yeah, this episode is going to get an A. I prefer Freak the Freak Out as the finale of the season, but this episode isn't a pushover. It's solid. Victorious season 1 was actually better than I remembered it being, mostly because I changed my feelings on non-singing episodes. While I said that there was some burnout when it got to the Dale Squires episode, I loved how there were a couple of episodes like Stage Fighting and Walkstar that showed off different sides of the school and the industry that they're going into. That stuff was balanced really nicely with the song performances, and for the most part, it felt like everyone had a role at this school. Also, character-wise, I've got to say that going in, I wasn't a fan of Jade and Kat, but that's because of how I remembered them being written in the later seasons, where I remembered Jade to be more nonchalant and Kat to have the IQ of Patrick Star. But in season 1, they were fun and energetic characters, speaking relatively for Jade, but yeah, some of the funniest moments came from their reactions and they were good singers. The only negative thing that I can say about this season is that I wasn't invested in some of their B-plots, and most of them never really connected with the main story. It kind of felt like Robbie and the other person that they picked for the B-plot were off in their own world. But that's the only negative that I have to say about Victorious season 1. This is a good season. Alright, now I'll talk about iParty with Victorious here, as it bridges the gap from season 1 to season 2, but I won't necessarily include it in one of the seasons. I'll just rate it as its own thing. Also, I've been holding on to a copy of the extended cut for years, so that's the version that I'll be talking about. So, in iParty with Victorious, there's this guy named Steven Carson that Carly and Tori ended up dating at the same time because he travels from LA to Seattle every month. So once the iCarlys find out potential evidence that Steven is cheating on Carly with Tori, and they know that there's going to be this party, they crash the party to find out the truth. That's the basic rundown of this movie. Movie in quotes because it's classified as a movie, a made-for-TV movie to be fair, but yeah, this is really just an extended episode. I said what I had to say about this crossover years ago, and despite now having seen the extended cut, that still doesn't really change how I feel about this crossover, so I'm just going to say mostly the same things that I said in that video. But starting off with the new thought that I have, I just wish that Steven Carson was either built up in the shows, or I just wish that he made appearances after the fact. I don't like how he just comes out of nowhere and gets no follow-up. It just makes him feel so out of place in this movie. Next, I really don't like the editing style of this crossover, especially before the party. It's just so herky-jerky, going back and forth from Seattle to LA every 2 or 3 minutes and not really giving time for plot points to establish and settle in. Essentially, for the first half of this movie, they're switching back and forth between an iCarly episode and a Victorious episode rather than having the crossover be more unified. Also, even when they got to the party, they just had a bunch of plot points going on, like Andre being stressed about the panda and too many people being at the party. Then there's Trina taking care of these children. Then there's Rex's rap battles. Then there's Psychowitz trying to scare Beck. There's all of this stuff, but none of it was as good as the iCarlys trying to find and expose Steven, and they just kept on giving it 1 or 2 minutes of screen time, then cutting to Sinjin and playing this surfboard game or something. Like, it's all over the place. Speaking of the plots, all of the Victorious characters outside of Tori got side content, while the iCarly characters, mainly the Golden Trio, get to take on the main plot, especially with the way that the story is set up, where the iCarlys get the feeling that Steven is cheating, but Tori doesn't know, and it follows their journey to LA, and they get the information that Steven is cheating first, and they expose Steven on their web show. This is an iCarly episode featuring Victorious, to which at the end of the day, that is true. This episode is labeled under iCarly, not Victorious. So it is expected that iCarly was going to be favored, especially since it was the bigger show. But considering the opportunity that they had, I just wish that some of the other Victorious characters outside of Tori had more relevance instead of being stuck in side plots that weren't really that amazing. But the biggest problem with this crossover is that it's barely even a crossover. Essentially, the iCarly and Victorious cast spent half of the movie separated, so that's a lot of lost time there. And even when they got to the party, they barely interacted with each other. Kat and Gibby had a short conversation. Spencer was kind of just there in this Jade, Beck, and Psychowitz acting thing. Sam had a rap battle with Rex, which was actually one of the better moments of this crossover. I have to give them that. But outside of the main thing, which was Tori teaming up with Carly, Sam, and Freddie to expose Steven, that's it in terms of interactions. Even when they got together at the end for this big mashup song, that was more of just a real life performance rather than an actual canon thing, especially since in Sam and Kat, they didn't even know each other, and Jade didn't know Sam, to which they didn't have to know each other by name, but at least acknowledge the familiarity, acknowledge that they sang a song at this party. So this crossover basically isn't even canon, especially since no one in their respective shows seems to mention it after the fact. But getting back to the interactions in this crossover specifically, this was such a big missed opportunity for sure. Although Jade and Sam met in Sam and Kat, that could have happened here. Robbie and Freddie interacting could have been nice. It doesn't even have to be the obvious stuff like have Trina and Spencer interact, or Carly and Psychowitz interact. Like, there were so many possibilities, but none of that happened. Rather than a unified, fully utilized crossover, it was just a series of separate plots and switching back and forth between them. Show a scene of Kat talking on her translator, but don't show her interacting with Spencer or something, and I can go on, but this just isn't a good crossover. I like the rapping and I like the mashup song at the end, despite originally not liking it. So that's something, but this is not a fully utilized crossover. They didn't get the most out of it that they could have got. The main appeal is that they have all of these Victorious and iCarly characters in one special, in one room, but that's it. They barely let them interact with each other. So this crossover special is going to have to get a C- grade. It's enjoyable at points, but it didn't live up to its potential. Like, it had no reason to not be a top 10 episode of Victorious. Victorious Season 2, Episode 1. Begging on Your Knees. In this episode, this writer Daniels guy shows up out of nowhere and starts dating Tori, kind of like Steven Carson from the last thing that I talked about. But yeah, at first, it was going well until information started coming out on the guy that he's sketchy because he dates and breaks up with a lot of girls. And what really sank Ryder was when Robbie got this information from a girl that he liked that Ryder tricked her into dancing with him for a class project, and once they got a good grade, Ryder never talked to her again. And in this episode, Ryder tricked Tori into agreeing to sing with him for a homework assignment. So once everyone found out about this, they made this song called Begging on Your Knees and exposed Ryder at the Full Moon Jam, and that's the last time that he's ever heard of in the Victorious universe. Then for the side plots, there was Kat getting a new phone number, but she kept on getting calls meant for this North Star emergency service. Then there's Robbie trying to change his image and be cool. None of these really amounted to anything, so the main plot has to carry this episode. It holds up its end of the bargain, it's entertaining, but the other stuff drags this episode down some. But not too much, because the Begging on Your Knees performance is one of the best songs in the show, so that's going to bring this episode up to an A- grade. Also, side note, this doesn't affect the episode, but the episode ended with Ryder getting embarrassed and Tori coming out victorious when I would have liked to see some more closure. Like, did he fail? Did he move schools or something? He could have been a person to bring back for a potential revenge arc maybe. It's just something that I thought about, but it's not going to affect this episode's A- grade. Episode 2, Beck Falls for Tori. This episode is about Tori lying to get a gig in a movie, but because she looks too similar to the lead, she's actually offered a stunt double job because of her friends telling her to spice up her resume with fake stuff so she can actually have a resume. So she takes the gig, but then she doesn't want it until Jade, Beck, Andre, and Psychowitz tell her that she could potentially get blackballed from Hollywood if she doesn't go through with this. So she eventually goes to set, but once she learns that this will be a 40-foot drop, she ends up being scared for the rest of the episode until Beck just does it for her. And for the B plot, it's about Kat being in this costume design class and wearing and making all of these different outfits that actually came into play in the main plot. For once, I actually like the B plot. I like Kat as a character, and her plot was fun and didn't take away from the show, and it even became story relevant at a point. I also liked how Jade kept on mocking Tori in this episode with that southern voice. Good stuff. But I was just really underwhelmed with the main plot of Tori struggling with her stunt double gig and trying everything possible to not fail. It just wasn't that interesting. Also, in the end, Beck ended up falling for her, which is nice utilization of him because Beck hasn't done anything important in a while, but because the episode is so Tori focused and Beck did the stunt, the conclusion feels so unearned and lackluster. Even when Tori came back to perform the stunt, it didn't even seem like it was for the movie because she wasn't dressed up and there was no table, so they probably already got the scene from Beck and this was just for Tori to get over her fear. But in the end, that didn't happen, as she didn't fall herself, she got pushed off by Jade. When talking about why Tori is a bad character, this is the incident that should get brought up more, how she made her bed and didn't want to lay in it. Then when Beck did the stunt for her, she got all of the recognition in that moment. It's not really made clear if everyone working on the movie knows that it was Beck, but assuming they don't, Beck saved Tori's ability to still be cast in projects because she didn't get blackballed. Meanwhile, Beck gets nothing out of this. Anyways, I said that I liked the episodes in the first season that didn't focus on singing that much and taught lessons about living in Los Angeles and going to a performing arts school. Overall, this lesson focused on potential blackballing in the industry, which is definitely important, but this episode just didn't hit. It wasn't the most riveting watch, and it had an unsatisfying conclusion that led to no payoff, so it's going to get a C. Also, side note, it's not going to affect this rating, but with an episode title like Beck Falls for Tori, I thought that this was going to be something else, like romance, but they wasted a good title on an underwhelming episode, so yeah, it's definitely going to get a C. Episode 3, Ice Cream for Kesha. In this episode, Tori gets stuck being Trina's assistant because of a deal that she made 10 years ago. But Trina agreed that Tori's service can end if she gets Trina a private performance from Kesha that Tori offered. The reason why this Kesha concert is important is because Andre was eating all of this ice cream for a contest. At the bottom of every ice cream container, there's a letter. The available letters are the letters from Kesha's name. If they find all of the letters to spell Kesha, then that person gets a private concert that they can invite their friends to. So that's what everyone was focused on in this episode, trying to get that concert. I love how they brought back a focused episode with just one main plot, because the B and sometimes C plots are hit or miss, and the episode quality tends to be way better when they just focus on one plot. But yeah, this was a solid and fun episode. There were a bunch of fun moments in here, like Robbie getting jumped by the moms, and Jade telling Trina to never touch her, and Tori spiraling when she couldn't find the last letter, and this kid that got the last letter getting too big for his britches and asking Tori, Jade, and Kat for kisses just to get tricked and locked out of the house. Good stuff. Also, the performance from Kesha was great. I used to like her songs. So yeah, this episode is going to get an A. I'm saving A+ for legendary, extraordinary episodes. This wasn't quite that, but there's really nothing to be mad at. It's a solidly good episode, so it's going to get an A. Also, just want to add this in. I couldn't help but notice that there was some ice cream in this episode named Funky Nut Blast, and I'm watching this like 3 months after Quiet on Set, so that caught my eye, and it just got me wondering how innocent that was. Speaking of Quiet on Set, at the time that I'm writing this, I don't know if this is because of Quiet on Set, but I heard that some scenes got removed from this episode on Paramount Plus rather recently. I didn't look at that version. I found a way to get the full version, so I wouldn't know exactly what was cut. But when comparing, the version that I watched was about 23.5 minutes long, while the Paramount Plus version is about 21 minutes and 50 seconds long. So that seems to be the case that something was cut, and it seems like slowly but surely scenes from other episodes are getting cut, and by the time that this video releases, they might be done and some episodes won't be in their original state. I just want to document that. I appreciate that they're removing inappropriate or uncomfortable scenes, but for this video, I just want to experience everything. That's why I held on to an extended cut of iParty with Victorious for so long. But yeah, none of that affects this episode. It's going to get an A. Episode 4, Tori Gets Stuck. In this episode, there's this big play, Steamboat Susie, that Jade wanted to get the lead role in, but when Tori got the lead and Jade got the understudy role, to which Tori's been going to this school for a good amount of time now. She's even performed in a play that probably had an understudy, but here she didn't even know what an understudy was, but whatever. But yeah, Jade is unhappy with her role, unhappy that she can sit back and get a free grade. She wants to be the lead in this play, so she tries everything she can to sabotage Tori. Couple of other things to mention. Robbie had to go to the hospital because he had a toy car inside of him and he needed some of Tori's blood to perform an operation. Also, Trina was playing a role in the Steamboat Susie play, and she had to learn how to make her coughing believable, so she got up close to a tuberculosis patient to learn, but she actually ended up getting tuberculosis, it seems. This episode is not going to get a top tier rating. Above all else, Jade was so annoying in this episode. She's supposed to be somewhat of an antagonist, but like Psychoid said at the end of this episode, she was being a gank. She just wasn't funny in this episode, and that's what this episode revolves around, her attempts to sabotage Tori. So I love that in the end, after Tori having to give up 3 pints of blood and not being able to go on with the play, I love that Psychowitz just took Jade's understudy role because she just didn't deserve to be in that play. But yeah, just spending a good amount of this episode in the hospital away from the play wasn't fun. I wasn't interested too much in anything they had going on over there. Also worth noting that Beck wasn't in this episode, to which he hasn't been the most important character. Sometimes he fades into the background, but I still like him in the group. Also, side note, I wish that the song The Captain Is She got an extended version. It sounds nice. But yeah, although the word mid is overused, this is an episode that really is mid. The only thing I'd use this episode for is a Tori Vega agenda, because she gave 3 pints of blood to Robbie, because with the other 2, Jade sabotaged one and Robbie accidentally dropped the other. Tori bailed Robbie out 2 times by reviving Rex in season 1 and giving Robbie the blood here. So this episode is nice for propping Tori up, but it has no real value outside of that. It just isn't memorable, especially with no legitimate song performance, to which I don't consider the short Steamboat Susie song to be a whole performance, like Begging on Your Knees from the first episode. Songs don't make or break an episode, but they can definitely help, and having one here probably would have tipped the scale for an episode that's not that memorable, not that amazing. So it probably could have got a B- grade with the memorable song performance, but it's going to get a C grade. Definitely not an episode that I just have to rewatch, but it's not horrible. Episode 5, Prom Wrecker. In this episode, Jade wants to have this performance about clowns, while Tori wants to have a prom because Hollywood Arts never had one, despite in the first episode Rex telling Kat that no one asked her to prom, but he could just be talking about someone from another school asking Kat to their prom. Anyways, Tori got permission from Psychowitz to have this prom that they're gonna call a prom, but I'm just gonna call it a prom. So while planning it, Jade stormed in and told Tori to cancel it because it's on the same day as her performance, but Tori stood her ground, so Jade set out to ruin the prom. For side plots, Andre is with this new girl that won't stop kissing him. Robbie asked Kat to the prom, but she said no because she's going with a guy named Tug. But since Rex told Robbie, or rather Robbie told himself, that Tug isn't real, Robbie spent the rest of this episode trying to make Kat feel bad for lying, even though Tug was real. Then there's Trina wanting to win prom queen and getting Sinjin to rig the votes. So with Jade trying to sabotage Tori and also having no Beck in this episode once again, this is kind of a retread of the previous episode. Tori gets stuck, but just because it's similar in some ways, that doesn't mean that it'll get a similar rating. The setting is better. I like the lively Hollywood Arts prom over a boring hospital, and talking about a car being inside of Robbie's bottom, which just isn't the most pleasing thing to hear. Also, the conclusion is better because in the previous episode, neither Tori or Jade won, but in this episode, Tori won and got to perform one of the best songs in the show, Best Friend's Brother, which is definitely the highlight of this episode. Tori, Kat, and Andre sounded so great in the song. But yeah, this works better than the previous episode because in both cases, Tori was in the right, but in the last episode, she didn't really get to perform in the play. Now, in this episode, Jade talked about her performance and she had a flyer, but considering that Psychowitz let Tori schedule her prom on the same day as Jade's performance, that probably means that Jade didn't even schedule her performance, or Psychowitz just ignored it because in the end, a prom that's never been had at Hollywood Arts before satisfies more people than Jade's performance, that they have a bunch of them every year. Regardless of if Jade actually scheduled her performance or not, it's all Psychowitz's fault here, not Tori. I also love that Tori didn't give up on her prom because Jade hasn't been the best friend to her. Literally in the previous episode, she took Tori's blood and tried to sabotage her role in Steamboat Susie. Plus, in the first season, Tori got funding and made sure Jade could have her play to impress her father. And Tori was there for her when Jade broke up with Beck. Like, Jade isn't really owed anything here. So I love that Tori gets to have a satisfying conclusion and Jade loses. Also, I want to mention that the side plots have been getting better. All of them were related to the prom and they were entertaining. So the side plots are going to lift this episode up. In the end, this episode is going to get an A grade. Fun episode. Episode 6 and 7, Locked Up. Same rules from the Freak the Freak Out episode apply here. It'll be rated as one big episode. In this episode, after finding out that Tori has no plans for the semester break, Festus tells Tori about his brother in Yerba that owns a hotel, and he says how they want American entertainment. So if Tori and her friends can provide that, then they can stay at the hotel for free. So that's the play. They get Sikowitz as a chaperone and they're off to Yerba. But when they get there, they find out that it's not as luxurious as the picture made it out to be, and actually it's a country at war. When they can't even make it a night there because of the war and guards coming into their room to arrest someone, they request out, but they can't leave because they agreed to 7 nights of performances, and the guards were there to make sure that happened. So they ended up performing the song, but events like Tori's shoe hitting the Chancellor in his last good eye, and Robbie accidentally putting the Chancellor's octopus on a t-shirt when he was about to let Tori out, that landed everyone except for Sikowitz in Urbanian prison. And the rest of the second episode focuses on the prison life and how they're going to escape, which ended up happening at the end as they snuck out after this song performance that they had for the Chancellor to make it up to him. Alright, so to get the negative out of the way, I just couldn't look at Andre in this episode. What happened was that he got bit by a vampire moth and this lump started growing out of the side of his neck. It's just always unsettling to look at, but outside of that, this was a solid episode. Firstly, I love the new intro that they made, mostly using clips from the special. Like, it makes it feel like an event, like a special episode should. I also like how there's high stakes from being away from Hollywood arts in a different country that's at war, and there's always soldiers around, and any slip up could land them in prison. Like, this place just has a unique feel to it. Also, the prison life, with Kat getting into a gang, and the prison break planning was fun. I love that stuff when it's fictional. Also, the songs, All I Want Is Everything and the I Want You Back cover were so good. I always had the Freak the Freak Out special clearly above this one, but the thing is, I just like Give It Up and Freak the Freak Out more than All I Want Is Everything and I Want You Back, which are still very good performances. So yeah, these two specials are very comparable, so they're going to get the same A+ grade. Definitely one of the best and most memorable episodes in the show up to this point. Episode 8, Helen Back Again. In this episode, after Principal Eichner resigns from his job, Helen from Drake and Josh becomes the new principal of Hollywood Arts and makes everyone re-audition to get back into the school. Realistically, it's so dumb to have re-auditions in the middle of the school year. Like, try at the beginning of next school year, but the plot has to plot. So that's understandable. So the main conflict comes when one of the Vega sisters didn't get reaccepted. First, it was Tori, then it was revealed that Trina was accidentally marked down as Tori and that Trina is the untalented one. So yeah, the whole second half of this episode is about convincing Helen to let one of the Vega sisters back into the school. Alright, I emphasize that this was Helen from Drake and Josh, but that was never really part of my experience. Drake and Josh was before my time, so she was just a regular person, a star in her role for sure, but I didn't know of her significance until I actually watched Drake and Josh a few years ago. Like I said, she's not a nostalgic throwback for me. That's probably how this episode can be the most effective, like for Drake and Josh fans, so she wasn't that, but like I said, she played her role well. Next, I've got to say that Tori and Andre's Make It Shine remix was so good, and I don't like how it kind of got buried because it doesn't seem to be on an official soundtrack, and the YouTube video is titled the Let It Shine remix rather than the Make It Shine remix. Let It Shine is a movie. Let It Shine is a song in Let It Shine. Maybe this was intentional and they actually wanted to name this new version Let It Shine, but yeah, this was always weird to me. Next, in the end, when Trina used her karate to save Helen from Robbie the robber, I liked how they showcased that Trina is talented, but she focuses on the wrong things rather than what she's good at. I've never been one to say that Trina is talentless, so I love that moment, but I don't like how she wasn't able to get into the school because of her martial arts, but she got in because she saved Helen. But then it's questionable if that would even qualify as a performing art. Like in some cases, it could be used in a play or maybe some stunt work, but it's understandable why they took the angle of Trina is still bad at performing arts, but she can go there because she saved Helen. But yeah, this was a really fun and cohesive episode that lacked uninteresting subplots, and it gave a good musical performance with a satisfying conclusion. So in the end, it's going to get an A grade. Episode 9. Who Did It to Trina? Second Trina focused episode in a row, or at least it seems that way because of her name being in the title. So gonna see how that turns out. In this episode, Tori wrote a play that Trina wanted to be the lead in, so she got the part. But on the day of the play, Trina's harness broke and she got sent flying around the room and a wall fell on her. So that launched an investigation on who did it to Trina. And since the main group was all with her at some point in the day, they were all suspects. So for a good portion of this episode, they're all giving these exaggerated versions of what happened until they realize that they're not getting anywhere and maybe the equipment was just old. So they called the investigation off. And at the end of the episode, it was revealed that Robbie messed with the equipment because Trina hit Rex. First off, where's Beck? When I watched this in 2020, I don't remember him missing this many episodes, but him being in this episode probably wasn't going to change what I have to say about it. I don't like flashback episodes at all. I don't like the framing of it, like seeing the most interesting part of the story, then backtracking to less interesting setup stuff. I like mysteries, but I don't like when they're told through a flashback. Plus, even with the exaggerations, everyone was telling a story about the same thing, so it kind of just felt like a retread whenever someone started explaining their story, so I don't like that. Plus, Andre was so annoying in this episode. Everything he had to say was about Kiko. Like, I get it. Also, when talking about how bad some of the characters are because of their actions, it makes no sense how Robbie sabotaging Trina's harness goes unmentioned. I always gave Robbie a pass for this because I actually used to think that Rex was an actual thing, like he's living, but no. Rex is a puppet controlled by Robbie, but everyone kind of treats Rex like he's his own thing sometimes. Speaking of Rex being a puppet, I kind of just started to notice in the iParty with Victorious special, and I had an eye for it in this episode, but Robbie is literally mouthing Rex's lines. In real life, that's probably so the actors know when to talk, but in the show, there's no question. Rex didn't sabotage Trina, it was Robbie. It doesn't necessarily make him a badly written character, that's ridiculous, but as a person that liked Tori in 2020 and saw all of these laundry lists of her bad actions, I have to keep score. But yeah, getting back to the episode, they had a Nathan Crest sighting, Freddie Benson, so that's nice, but it's not going to save this episode from getting a D. Definitely wasn't their best or most memorable effort. Episode 10. Tori tortures teacher. In this episode, Tori wasn't impressed with the 1-cup coffee maker that the principal got Sikowitz for his 10-year anniversary at Hollywood Arts, so she took him to a play that made fun of teachers, which sent Sikowitz into a depression, so they had to deal with that for the rest of the episode because it just kept on spiraling into other stuff. Like at first, they thought it was about the play. Then it was because a woman broke up with him, so they tried to find him a lover. But then it turned out that he didn't miss the woman, he missed her pet bunny, so they got him one. But it turns out that Bunny was just the name of the cat that he liked. It was just a spiral. While for side plots, Beck and Jade were text fighting for a solid amount of this episode, which didn't really add that much. Also, Trina started liking this guy at school and made this whole pizza delivery operation just to get to his house, all for her efforts to fail in the end because he had a girlfriend. I didn't care for the Beck and Jade text fighting stuff, but despite Trina and Kat's side plot being in the format that I usually don't like because it doesn't connect with the main plot, this time around, I actually like it. It gave some good laughs, especially at the end when Trina threw the pizza on the wall. It's still a change of pace to flip from the main plot to something that's completely unrelated, but this was actually interesting, so I don't really have a problem with it. As for the main plot, I'm not a fan of it because for a good amount of this episode, it's just Psychowitz being depressed, which wasn't fun to watch. It gave this episode a somber tone. At the end of the day, since they didn't get Psychowitz a cat, it's like they accomplished nothing and the conclusion is unsatisfying because Psychowitz is still depressed. The main plot is really nothing special, and if it weren't for Trina and Kat's plot, this could have got a low grade, but it's gonna get a C. I'm saving F tier for bad episodes. This wasn't a bad episode, but it was forgettable and I wouldn't go out of my way to watch it again. Episode 11, Jade Gets Crushed. In this episode, Tori wants to take an R&B vocals class, but she can't because she needs to pass tech theater first. But Lane said that she doesn't need to take the class, she just needs to take the exam. So she spent half of this episode studying with Robbie. But because Tori wasn't available to record a song with Andre for his class, Andre got stuck working with Jade, which initially seemed like a bad situation because Andre was scared of Jade. But once Jade started singing, Andre started liking her, which just can't happen because Jade is mean to everyone and she's already going out with Beck. So that's the conflict that Andre deals with for the rest of the episode. And for the side plot, it was just Kat bouncing around in some new shoes. They really had nothing for her in this episode. It's just so laughable. But first off, for the longest time, I thought that the title was weird. Jade Gets Crushed, because it didn't happen literally. It's not like Jade went through a crisis, but I realized that they probably mean that Jade gets crushed on by Andre. So that makes more sense. But a better title for this episode would have been Andre Gets Crushed, or Jade Crushes Andre, because not only is he the main character of this episode, but also in this episode, it was apparent how his crush on Jade was really messing with Andre and making him act weird, and he even woke Tori up in the middle of the night to talk about this. Like, that crush on Jade dictated the whole episode. But enough talk about the title. Like, it's just a title. It's not going to affect the grade that this episode is going to get. But yeah, like I said, it was nice to see Andre taking on the main character role in this episode and having a nice and meaningful interaction with someone that he's not really seen talking to a ton, because Jade has always had Beck. I've never shipped Jade and Andre, but just watching them together was fun. And although the episodes where everyone is all together are always fun, like they're always the best episodes, there should be some episodes like this that take a more serious turn and focus on strengthening one-on-one relationships within the group. This episode is even good for Tori because she stuck by Andre and helped him get over his crush by the end. Although I thought I wanted Beck and Andre drama, I'm glad that it didn't go down that route and they were able to have a happy ending. Also, there was a great song performance at the end of this episode, 365 Days. So this episode is actually going to get an A+. They had the Tori plot, but I wasn't too interested in that, so I love that they wrapped it up quickly and got to the good stuff, and when they got there, they didn't get in their own way. It's a serious episode and they kept it that way, making it feel unique. Now, I wish that more could have been done in the future to build off of what was established in this episode, because stuff that happened in this episode was mentioned again in the future, but that's not going to affect this episode's rating. That's really only relevant in a hypothetical potential video on the biggest missed opportunities in Victorious. But yeah, it's an outstanding episode, so it's going to get an A+. Episode 12, Terror on Cupcake Street. In this episode, Psychowitz offers the main group a chance to participate in this parade, which didn't sound interesting to them until he mentioned the national TV aspect. So they got to work on this cupcake shaped float that was Kat's idea, and everything was going well until they got a flat tire in a very bad neighborhood with a lot of gang members and sketchy characters. So the episode shows their experience in this neighborhood, being these rich performing art school students in this rough neighborhood, and it shows their escape attempts, how they tried to get out of this situation. So in my original episode ratings, I rated this episode very low because I usually liked episodes with songs in them, and this episode didn't have one. Add that to the fact that I preferred for the episodes to be focused on Hollywood arts or Tori learning at this school, and for the most part, they're just freaking out in a cupcake float. But after watching this episode again, I've turned around on it. I love the survival of the hottest episode, and this episode felt like it was cut from a similar cloth, with everyone being together and being paranoid about being in this sketchy neighborhood. I also laughed when Andre broke Robbie's parapet that he just kept on using for everything in this episode. And yeah, it's a solid episode away from the school in a new environment, dealing with new threats like gang members and Psychowitz getting arrested was fun to see. Now, this isn't one of the best episodes of the series, and Survival of the Hottest was better, so it's not going to get an A+ because it's not on that level. And even with the renewed perspective, this just isn't one of the first episodes that I would rewatch, but a B+ is a good grade for it. It's a B+ version of Survival of the Hottest. Episode 13, A Christmas Tori. In this episode, the main group has to participate in this secret Santa thing that Hollywood Arts had going on. The person that gives out the worst gift has to go yodeling with Psychowitz, so there's pressure. Tori had to be Andre's secret Santa, and she got him a small guitar, but right as she was about to give it to him, Robbie got Kat a cotton candy machine, and that made Tori's gift seem small. And that's a constant theme throughout this episode. All of the main characters have no problem with their secret Santa gifts, but Tori struggled the most. That is, until Jade's secret Santa gift to Tori was an idea for a gift for Andre. His teacher gave him a D on the song that he wrote, and it was tearing him up all week. So Tori, Jade, Kat, and Andre performed it in front of the whole school for everyone to judge, and they got the teacher to change his mind for a happy ending. For me, I would prefer to watch this episode while it's the holiday season and see how well it gets me into the Christmas spirit, because that could be a good indicator for how good a Christmas episode is. But unfortunately, I just don't have that option available to me right now, as I'm writing this in June and planning for this to be released around Christmas time. So I'm not in a setting to fully appreciate it, but this episode is still good. In terms of atmosphere, the dialogue wasn't the best. All they really had was saying ho 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 a bunch of times. I would have preferred a little bit more variation, but visually, they were able to create a nice Christmas atmosphere with all of the decorations. Like, it's immersive. They really made it feel like a special episode that's going to stand out from the rest. And it was nice to see everyone so excited and thankful for their gifts. Like, it painted a positive aura around this episode. Also, It's Not Christmas Without You was a really good song, the highlight of the episode for sure. And I like how Tori saw everyone handing out material objects, but kind of like the Birth Week song, she went a different route and sang a song to help Andre out, showing that presents don't always have to be so materialistic, which I've come to terms with over the past, say, 5 to 7 years. So it's nice to see that ring true. This episode is going to get an A+. Great episode, nothing to really complain about. Episode 14, Blooptorious. Well, it's just a glorified blooper reel. Part of me doesn't want to count it because it's not really intended to be a real deal episode, but looking at this from a non-streaming perspective, I can imagine being a kid waiting for the new episode of Victorious just to get this, an uneventful, unfunny blooper reel of actors messing up their lines. It's a good bonus episode, maybe to learn some fun facts about the actors and see a little bit of the behind the scenes action, but in the end, this episode is a total waste of time, so it deserves an F. But good on them for being able to repurpose that content and being able to make an episode out of it. I respect that so much. That's smart. Victorious Season 2 was a wild ride. Definitely an up and down season. For the positives, I want to say that it felt like the cast had more chemistry, which would only be natural with it being the second season and everything, but I don't really have any specific examples to point to show the advancement. It's more of just a vibes thing, so I'm going to leave that there. But for the positives that I have a really good feeling about, they have some of the best and most memorable episodes of the show, like the Locked Up special and Jade Gets Crushed. They also have some amazing song performances like Begging on Your Knees, Best Friend's Brother, and All I Want Is Everything, to name a few. Like, they've always delivered on the songs up to this point. I also have to say that they finally wrote some good side plots. In the first season, it felt like the B plot was just Robbie, an ex-character, off in their own world, partaking in something completely unrelated to the main story. But in this season, they found a way to have more of these subplots intertwined with the main plot, like Trina and the tuberculosis patient. It felt like her own separate story, but at least she was part of the play and brought what she learned into the play. And even when some of the side plots felt like they were off in another world, like Kat helping Trina make pizza for the guy, at least that was entertaining. So the B plots got better for sure. Massive upgrade. But despite this season being better than the first in some ways, I also have to say that there are some really forgettable and mid episodes, like Who Did It to Trina and Tori Torture's Teacher, that either aren't interesting, don't have a satisfying conclusion, or both. Also worth noting that although I didn't really get a chance to touch on this, I've got to say that this is definitely not season 1 Kat. In this season, she's treated like more of a child rather than a ditzy teenager, which I preferred. She didn't ruin this season, but she had less funny moments, and her character definitely took a step back, so that's not positive. In my original videos, I thought that season 2 was peak Victorious and there was nothing wrong with it. And while it still may very well be peak Victorious, it's not perfect for sure. But in the end, it's a good season. Victorious Season 3, Episode 1, The Breakfast Bunch. There's no in-depth explanation needed for this episode. This episode is a kid-friendly, Victorious-style version of the 1985 Breakfast Club movie. Basically, they're in detention on a Saturday, and through the story, they hash out their differences and bond. I have a roller coaster type of relationship with this episode. At first, when I was like 10 years old watching this, I liked this episode because it was another episode where everyone was together and they were having so much fun. But then when the show got put on Netflix, that gave me time to reevaluate the show with an adult eye and with an adult perspective and get more information that I didn't have access to when I was a kid. So I found out that this episode was a parody of The Breakfast Club, and it's basically non-canon, and that soured my opinion on the episode because I actually thought that this was an original adventure, a unique adventure, and finding this out just sparked the question of why was this even made? It's a parody of a 1985 R-rated movie aimed towards kids and teens of 2012 that weren't even alive to see the original movie. Despite liking it, I used to think that this was such a weird episode because of Jade getting on Robbie and Kat about being vegans and never having a taco before. Then there's Andre getting really pumped off of those tacos. Now I know what all of that stuff actually means, which isn't necessarily the best thing that I understood this stuff later in life for what's supposed to be a kid slash teen show. It's just a questionable episode to make. But now, after rewatching it, despite it being unoriginal, I've got to say that up to this point, this is definitely the funniest episode in the show. I could tell that the actors really enjoyed this one. It's random at points, which I usually don't like, but it works here. They took a serious Breakfast Club movie and put their own fun, Victorious spin on it. I love it. Also, they hit on all of the songs used, like Run, Run, Run Away, and In This Together, and Don't You Forget About Me, making it an even more memorable episode. Definitely an A+ episode for sure. Episode 2, The Gorilla Club. In this episode, Tori goes to this dangerous gorilla club to take a risk and develop the necessary edge that she needs for this part that she's auditioning for. She progressively gets better at taking risks and acting throughout this episode until she's where she needs to be. But she got tackled by a gorilla and injured, which is why she ultimately doesn't get the part. And for the side content, there's Kat, just showing Tori up and being a natural at all of the dangerous stuff that they had to offer there at the Gorilla Club. Then there's Trina, walking around in these new Fazzini shoes that were way too tall. Then there's Robbie and Andre losing a game of cards to Jade, so they had to perform the Hammer Time dance every time she said so. I really love the Hammer Time plot. It was funny how Jade was using it at the most inconvenient times, like when Andre was trying to talk to a girl. As for the main plot, it's fine. Like everything they had going on at the Gorilla Club looked like so much fun, and it was nice to see Tori progressively get better at these games and acting throughout this episode. I'll give it a B+. It's not an elite episode, but it's fine enough. Like I wouldn't change the channel on this if it were to come on. Episode 3, The Worst Couple. This episode really centers around Beck and Jade arguing all the time. It got so bad that they were voted the worst couple on Sinjin's game show, and none of their friends wanted to hang out with them. So Beck ended the relationship because he ultimately wasn't happy in it. Then for the side plot, Tori's old phone was malfunctioning, but she didn't want to get a new one because once she gets a new GX, they're gonna announce the new XT. And while everyone has the new XT, Tori is gonna be stuck with the old GX, and she made that known throughout this episode. This was the first time that I actually got annoyed by her. For the main plot, I'm glad that Beck freed himself and got his independence back because this was such a dysfunctional relationship, and it was kind of funny how they were playing this sad music and shocked sound effects when Beck and Jade broke up because they weren't a healthy couple. But I flat out didn't care about Sinjin's lame game show that took up half of this episode. And with Beck and Jade arguing all the time and being annoying, this wasn't a fun episode for sure. Add in Tori being annoying, then this episode just has to get an F. This just wasn't it. The worst couple? More like the worst episode. Episode 4, Andre's Horrible Girl. In this episode, Andre had to put up with this terrible girlfriend of his because her father is big in the music industry and Andre wanted to get some type of deal going. This makes no sense as to why Andre is stressed out over this because in season 1, in the Diddly Bops episode, after he performed Song to You, I'm assuming that the record company picked them up again. So what even happened to them? I can't even give them the excuse of it's an episodic show with very little continuity because not only are they carrying over the Jade and Beck breakup, but in this episode, Miss Lee, from all the way back in the Walkstar episode, literally the episode right after the Diddly Bops episode, she made an appearance here at her new restaurant, Nozu. It's kind of random on what they decide to carry over and forget, and I just want to see more consistency. This isn't revealing where I rank this episode, but instead of getting this episode, this would have been the perfect time to continue that already established storyline from season 1 and have a nice callback. But anyways, while Andre was dealing with his girlfriend, Kat got a pet sitting job at her mother's boss's house, but everything goes wrong for her when the rest of the group tags along and unintentionally destroys valuable stuff in the house. This is one of the episodes that I originally gave a bad grade because of my strict criteria, but no, this was actually a good and eventful episode. Although I don't agree with Andre's outlook on the situation, just using that girl so he can get a record deal, I love how he stood up for himself to someone that caused him so much pain throughout this episode, and he was still able to get into a situation where he could perform his song, to which Countdown isn't one of the first songs that I'd go to, but it's still a good song. So far, they have not released a bad song. So there's that. Then what they had going on in the B plot with Kat and Jade, then later Beck and Robbie was fun, with them just clowning around and accidentally destroying stuff. This episode is going to get an A. Episode 5, Car, Rain, and Fire. In this episode, Kat is upset because she thinks that one of her favorite actresses got put on a t-shirt. So Jade drove Kat and Tori to Mona's house so Kat could get over it and focus on the science project that she had with Tori. While for the B plot, it's about Trina spreading lies about Beck asking her out. So he got Andre and Robbie in on this plan to play with Trina's feelings and embarrass her in front of her father for being crazy. I really didn't care for Kat, Tori, and Jade sitting in a car for most of this episode, and I just didn't like how they were treating Kat. Every time they wanted to go back, it was always this feeling of they can't give up on this child. She was even literally called that in this episode, which just shows how far her character has fallen. So the A plot was terrible. The B plot wasn't great either, but at least it was funny at the end when Beck, Robbie, and Andre all came together to mess with Trina. If it weren't for that, then this episode would be getting an F, but it's going to get a D. It's still not a good episode at all, but Robbie, Beck, and Andre's shenanigans saved it from being the worst thing that I've ever seen. Episode 6, Tori and Jade's Playdate. Interesting title. In this episode, Psychowitz couldn't help but laugh at Tori and Jade's performance in his play because they weren't a believable husband and wife, so he made them go on a date so they could get better at playing their role. Then for the B plot, it was about Robbie and Kat going around singing bad news to people, delivering it in a way that wouldn't sound so bad. I really enjoyed their songs, so that was a good B plot. And speaking of songs, this episode had the song Take a Hint. At this point, every song so far is a serious contender for one of the best songs in Victorious, but this was next level. Tori and Jade sound so nice together, and it was just nice seeing them at this restaurant, having awkward conversations and not getting along the best, but when their peace got disrupted by these annoying guys that were hitting on them and they couldn't take a hint, Tori and Jade put their differences aside and just took it to them lyrically and destroyed them. Everything about this episode was good, so it's gonna earn an A+ grade. Episode 7, April Fool's Blank. This episode really has no structure outside of being random. It's an episode filled with random events happening and the characters acting out of character. Now, this episode is supposed to be random, but that's not going to save it. The "it accomplished what it's going for" excuse has always been a bad excuse because by that logic, anything can be considered good. This episode was supposed to be random, but that doesn't mean that it was good because it accomplished being random. Actually, the randomness here just didn't work like it worked in the Breakfast Bunch episode. I saw what they were going for, but this episode fell flat. In the first season, Victorious felt like more of a teenager show, but this episode solidified the kids show direction that they shifted to. I never liked this episode, and if it weren't for the shut up and dance performance, then this episode would have gotten F, but instead it's gonna get a D. The song really saved it. Episode 8, Driving Tori Crazy. In this episode, there was this movie filming near Tori's house, which meant that she and Trina had to take the long way to school. She couldn't stand Trina for the now 40 minutes that they had to drive to school, and since she didn't have a license, which everyone made fun of her for in this episode, but yeah, This forced Tori to try riding to school with all of her friends that all came with their unique problems that made Tori not want to ride with them. Then for the B plot, it's about Kat finding this app that gave her discounts and stuff, and she went around handing this stuff out. Kind of a shameless rehash of her plot from Robbie when she was buying a bunch of stuff from this other store, so that's not good. The main plot wasn't good either. Like, I didn't find any of this stuff to be funny. And for the rap, 5 Fingers to the Face. It's actually nice to finally hear this after Kat cut herself off from rapping the full rap in season 1, so it's nice to keep that continuity and finally deliver. But the rap just isn't good, and it's a legitimate contender for the worst song in the show. There's nothing good about this episode, so it's gonna get an F. Episode 9, How Trina Got In. In this episode, Tori and Robbie got stuck working at Nozu for the afternoon because they didn't bring any form of payment, while back at Hollywood Arts, after hearing Trina singing, Kat questioned how Trina got into Hollywood Arts, which just led to everyone telling their version of how she got in. It's kind of similar to the Who Did It to Trina episode because it involves Trina as the main subject and they're telling everything through flashbacks, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this episode will get a similar grade. This was actually a very fun episode. Like, Miss Lee was someone that I always looked at as an afterthought. Just one of the random characters that they met along the way, but she's been so funny in every episode that she's been in. Always pressing Tori about leaving her daughter up there on the ceiling and just being so blunt about her feelings. Then there was the Chop the Squid song and Kat's bra licorice that Jade actually cut with her scissors. Like, that was fun. And all of the retellings of how Trina got in were entertaining, especially the one where she fought all of the judges. It was a fun episode, but it wasn't one of the best episodes that they ever made, so it's going to get a B+ grade. Episode 10 and 11. Tori Goes Platinum. Same rules as Freak the Freak Out and Locked Up. This will be graded as one episode. So in this episode, everyone gets notified that the Platinum Music Awards will begin with a song from an unknown artist and they're going to become an overnight sensation. So everyone sends in their auditions and Tori gets picked, which is great because she wants to be a pop star. Like, this is literally her chance to jumpstart her career. But the higher ups didn't appreciate and accept Tori for Tori and had this flawed line of thinking that fans will grasp onto a character more than a song, and that's how she can build herself up before this performance. So a lot of this special focuses on the challenges that Tori deals with by adding this edge to her personality, which is tough for her because she did some mean stuff like dumping ravioli down an astronaut's pants, and just her overall change in personality wasn't her and she wasn't liking it. So Beck convinced Tori to stand up for herself and said that they can't find a replacement on such short notice, but when she stood up for herself, she got fired and the role was given to Jade. But ultimately, Jade decided to give Tori her part back because she saw a video call where Beck, for the second time in this episode, tried to kiss Tori, but Tori refused because she didn't want to hurt Jade, despite Beck and Jade being over. So Jade realized that she was wrong for stealing Tori's big night. Tori got her gig back, she got to sing Make It in America at the Platinum Music Awards, and that's all. Also, the side plot for this episode was about Kat having this Bibble addiction, which led to some funny moments with her parents literally having to get a security guard to keep Kat away from Bibble, so that was good fun. Speaking of Kat, I want to talk about the infamous auditions. The call to go with Tori over Kat wasn't a popular one, but I've always agreed with it. Kat could very well end up being above Tori when I make a character rankings video. Like, right now, it's up in the air, but I really enjoyed Tori's song, Cheer Me Up, over Kat's performance, and going Tori over Kat doesn't make Victorious unrealistic, or it doesn't make Tori a bad or perfect character. Actually, there was more reason for Tori to get the gig over Kat. I don't know if they had to send in like extra information, but based on the events that happened in this episode, Mason was clearly looking for someone that was easy to manipulate. Although Kat is basically a child, her personality is way too extreme to be manipulated. Like, she would take a lot of work because she's not that smart and probably wouldn't be able to implement some of that stuff that Tori could. Like, I can't see them forcing Kat to wear those outfits because she would probably just forget or something. Like, Kat's IQ level seems perfect for manipulation, but in reality, she would probably be tough to work with. So it made sense to go with Tori for the role, someone that wants the fame and is always looking to please people. And that's why Mason was successful for a good bit of this episode. So it worked somewhat. That's always how I saw it. Like, regardless of which performance was actually better, that always made the most sense to me. Anyways, they toyed with the idea of Bori in this episode, Beck and Tori, which hasn't really been as much of a thing as it could have been considering how the first episode played out. And now that Beck isn't with Jade anymore, it seemed like the perfect chance for Beck and Tori to get together, but they didn't really have a series long build up. So they have this episode here, and although I'm not a fan of Bori, it made no sense why Tori was so scared of Jade because she always seems to want to ruin every big opportunity that Tori gets. Like, she should have just kissed Beck right here. I don't hate how it actually played out because they made it work in the end, but my way would have made more sense because of how the dynamics were set up. Now for the song, Make It in America. What a great song. Now, out of the 3 specials, it's probably going to rank lower, but I love how the song and even this episode has this sense of finality to it. Like, it meshes well with the episode. At first, Tori was thrust into this crazy school and had to start over from scratch, and throughout the series, throughout all of her crazy adventures, she worked her way up to become one of the best performers at Hollywood Arts. Before she performed, she patched things up with Jade by not kissing Beck, which is where their journey even started in the first place, with Tori rubbing on Beck, kissing Beck. So seeing them sacrifice Beck and the performance shows how far they've come and grown as people. And now, with Tori performing Make It in America at the Platinum Music Awards, it really feels like she made it in America and accomplished her goal. Like, although nothing really came from this, like a music career for Tori, it felt like just being on that stage was the peak of her journey. And that's why I always considered this episode more fitting to be the finale than the actual finale, which isn't even the intended finale. It's just the final episode. But yeah, this special set out to be more grand than the other 2, and it succeeded at that, but at the end of the day, I would still rank this special below the others because despite this being more grand, Locked Up was more creative and Freak the Freak Out just had better songs. But this was still a great episode because of the finale feeling and showing Tori and Jade's growth, so it's going to get an A grade. Episode 12, Crazy Pawnee. This episode was part of the Just Jeanette night where she appeared in new episodes of iCarly, Victorious, and Bucket and Skinner. In this episode, this Pawnee character, played by Jeanette, just showed up out of nowhere and put Tori in a lot of positions to look crazy to everyone. She's seeking revenge on Tori because it's Tori's fault that Pawnee's not going to Hollywood Arts anymore, because when Tori got accepted, Pawnee was kicked out to make space for Tori, even though that's not true. She just got kicked out because she's crazy. Then for the B plot, Kat accidentally got rid of Jade's eyebrow, so their whole storyline was about Jade trying to get revenge, which eventually happened at the end. The B plot was good fun in this episode. As for the A plot, here's the thing. In my original episode ratings, I just gave everything post Tori Goes Platinum bad ratings because the show went away from what it was originally about. There have been some random episodes in season 3, but this is the start of a stretch of random episodes that's just going to last for the whole season. That's just what the show is at this point. So it's tough to grade because it's this mix of I came for Victorious and now I'm getting randomness, automatic F, but also I want to be accepting of where the show is now. And even though it's not really about performing arts anymore, I still want to find the good in these episodes, to which this episode wasn't about performing arts, but there were some fun moments in this episode between Jade, hunting down Kat, and Jeanette McCurdy had an amazing performance in this episode. Like, it was so nice to see her in another role. She was amazing. So I'm going to go with the mix. It's not necessarily what I'm here for, but it was entertaining at points. So it's going to get a B, which is higher than the frowning face rating that I originally gave it. Also, just want to say, not to say that this is a bad episode, but prior to rewatching this, the only detail that I remembered about this episode was that there's a creepy character named Crazy Pawnee. Then in Jessie, there was a similar character with a similar name in Creepy Connie. Like, that was always the first thing that came into my mind when I heard those two names. So even though they're not actually related, they always have that connection. Episode 13, The Blonde Squad. This episode is about Kat living a lie. She was wearing this blonde hair for Beck's movie, and after filming, the girls went to Nozu and she met this guy that really likes blondes. But because she really liked this guy, she struggled throughout this episode with breaking the truth to him that she's not actually blonde. Then for the side plot, it was about Andre trying to chase down his grandmother's parrot, which I really didn't care for. This was a more serious episode that focused on themes of acceptance. It just kept on getting drilled into Kat's head that the guy will appreciate her for the person that she is. And even when that was shown to not be true, there was Robbie at the end singing her a song about how he accepts her, which was nice. It was a good plot. Just wish that Kat didn't fumble it at the end by still wanting to be blonde. But yeah, this episode is going to get a B grade. The Andre plot knocks it down some. Before going on to the next episode, it's worth noting that although I'm covering this season as one big season, as that's what season 3 was made as, it's worth noting that this is the cutoff point where they decided to split season 3 in half, and the next 13 episodes are what's marketed as season 4, even though it wasn't made to be a 4th season. So the season recap isn't going to be right here. I'm going to talk about the remaining 13 episodes of season 3. Episode 14, Wanko's Warehouse. In this episode, Wanko's Warehouse is having this big sale, so everyone goes to wait for it. But when Tori and the group find out that the sale is in the morning rather than in a few minutes, they go inside and plan to stay the night so they can cut the line. However, this backfires on them as the security system turns on, trapping everyone in this one part of the store, and the rest of the episode focused on how they got out. Thankfully, there's just one plot to focus on, and even when the robbers came in, it still felt like one story because it all happened at Wanko's Warehouse. B plots have been getting better, but it's always nice when they can just focus all of their resources on one plot, or have all of their plots in the same area and have them overlap. And this episode ended up being funny at points, like when Andre got mad that they were trapped and kept on saying he can't take it, and Jade asked, "Can you take it?" in such a troll way. Then there was Trina and Jade backing up when asked who the flattest was when it was time to slide under the lasers. There was a lot of fun to be had in this episode, especially because they were all together. It's kind of trying to take from what Survival of the Hottest and Terror on Cupcake Street built, but in the end, those episodes are better, so it's going to get the lowest grade out of the 3, getting a B. Good episode, but I'm not going out of my way to watch Wanko's Warehouse when those exist. So it's a good episode, nothing more, nothing less. Episode 15, The Hambone King. In this episode, because of Robbie's skills, he becomes the Hambone King, which is nice for him that he got to accomplish something as the weakest link in the group. But this was short-lived as this guy named Gerald wanted the title of Hambone King and challenged Robbie, to which he ended up defeating Robbie. But it's revealed that Tori had a troubled past with Gerald and Hambone as well, so she agreed to train Robbie up for the big rematch, which Robbie ended up getting cheated out of, but Tori's there to get the last laugh against her rival. Then for the B plot, it was about Kat tap dancing around. Even a rewatch couldn't change how I felt about this episode. Easy F. No matter how much they tried to hype it up and have these intense pep talks and training scenes, I just don't care for ham boning. It's not interesting. Plus, despite me actually liking Tori as a character, the end is terrible, with Robbie going on this journey throughout this episode just for Tori to come in at the last second and hijack his moment, giving legs to the Tori steals the spotlight narrative that I haven't really agreed with so far, but this episode is a clear case of that. Like, don't let Gerald win, but after seeing Robbie train for the whole episode, it's unsatisfying to see Tori get this win when, yeah, she had history with Gerald, but this flat out wasn't her fight. This is kind of like in the Beck Falls for Tori episode when they showed all of Tori's struggles just for Beck to perform the stunt, making for an unsatisfying ending. Even if Tori didn't win the Hambone showdown and take Robbie's moment, this episode would still get an F, but it's just even more reason to give this episode an F. It's not good, it's not memorable in any way, and out of the F tier episodes, this is definitely the worst so far. Episode 16, Opposite Date. In this episode, Andre gets his pair pad broken, which leads him into entering this competition with Robbie where he could win a new pair pad. But because of this, they had to bail on their plans with Tori and Beck, leaving them as the only ones remaining that were going to the museum. But because Tori didn't want to go alone with Beck and basically go on a date, they agreed to go on an opposite date. Where things took a turn was when Kat found out about this and told Jade, and they spent the whole night trying to find Beck and Tori because Jade clearly still has feelings for Beck. This was another episode that I originally rated low because of the lack of focus on performing arts, but now I don't care. This was such a funny episode, with Jade and Kat being such a comedic pair, with Kat sticking her head out of the window and acting like a dog, and Jade imitating Kat's voice. Then there were all of these random people and even a kid at the pet hospital chiming in on Tori, Beck and Jade's relationship and adding fuel to the fire. So messy. They even had a satisfying conclusion with Jade just letting it go and realizing that she and Beck broke up and she's got to let him off the leash. The only thing that was amiss was Robbie and Andre being stuck up on a building in these pair costumes. I really didn't care for what they had going on, but this episode is going to get a B plus. Like, if it's not going to be about performing arts and they're not going to have a song performance, at least be funny, and this episode excelled at that. Episode 17, 3 Girls and a Moose. In this episode, Beck's Canadian friend Moose comes to town and Tori, Kat, and Jade just go over the top, competing for his love. But it comes with consequences because it got on Beck's nerves because he was supposed to be hanging out with his friend, but they were hogging him. And because they spent so much time with Moose, they missed their Tinkle Aid rehearsals with Beck, Robbie, and Andre, and they changed the show around to not include them, which really hurt the guys. So they should have just learned their lesson, but they all went to Beck's house to continue competing for Moose's love until he just had to say that he only loves Canadian girls because his LA experience with girls has been weird. So at Tinkle Aid, this probably isn't necessarily a diss track on Canadian boys in response to Moose shutting them down, but Tori and Kat sang a song about LA boys because that show was supposed to be for them and they almost ruined it fighting over Moose. This episode's only saving grace is that it has the song LA Boys, an amazing song, but outside of that, there's not much to like. The Moose obsession was way too extreme and it just wasn't funny. If it weren't for LA Boys, then this episode would be getting an F, but instead it's going to get a D. Episode 18, Cell Block. In this episode, because everyone was obsessed with using their phones, Psychowitz challenged them to go a week without using their phones and they'll get an A for the semester. So they accepted. But when Kat almost ruined it for them, the guys didn't want the girls to ruin it for them, so it became a boys versus girls thing, to which Psychowitz helped orchestrate a boys rule, girls drool style ending. Like I said, this part of the season lost the plot, and I originally gave this a sad face rating, but I'm actually willing to give this episode an A grade for being so funny, with everyone trying these different olden techniques to replace their phones, and watching Kat spiral while Tori and Jade tried to restrain her was fun. So were the shenanigans that the girls and boys tried to get ahead in this episode, so yeah, it's gonna get an A. Episode 19, Tori fixes Beck and Jade. The title is Cap. In this episode, there's this Meredith girl that's into Beck, and Tori wants Beck to be with her, but Beck can't because Jade used to be jealous of Meredith and he doesn't want her to just go off on him. So Tori decided that if Jade found a guy, then she wouldn't be jealous of Beck going out with Meredith. But Tori's attempt to get Jade with the guy failed because Jade's just way too intimidating, and they notched that up specifically for this episode. Then at the full moon gym, when Meredith kept on agreeing with everything that Beck said, Beck just said that easy is boring and he wants a girl with strong opinions, which led him to getting back together with Jade after her performance of You Don't Know Me. Then for the B plot, Robbie got a butterfly stuck in Kat's ear, so all episode they tried to get it out, which eventually happened when Andre's grandmother screamed into Kat's ear and the butterfly came out on the wrong side, implying that Kat doesn't have a brain, so that was funny. In the end, everything Jade was good when it came to her intimidation and her song performance, but everything that wasn't Jade was bad. Like, despite liking that moment at the end, I didn't care for Robbie and Kat's plot, and Beck is the worst. Like, I know they tried to make this situation specifically about Jade being jealous of Meredith, but I just can't ignore when he tried to kiss Tori and Tori goes platinum, and he didn't care about Jade being jealous when he went on an opposite date with Tori. And I liked him in those episodes because he was distancing himself from that toxic relationship and gaining his independence. Now, all of a sudden, he cares about what Jade thinks, and by the end of it all, he caved and got back together with Jade. That's just really unsatisfying for Beck, someone that had a lot of potential, but when it's character ranking time in a future video, I can't imagine that he'll be too high on the list. It's a really nice Jade episode, which is going to save it from getting an F, but it's only going to get a D. This just wasn't a satisfying conclusion. Episode 20, 1000 Berry Balls. In this episode, Tori wanted some money, so she took this gig at Andre's job where she had to give away 1,000 of these nasty berry balls in a bad outfit, which ends up being problematic because they had to make it back to school for the dance. Speaking of the dance, for the B plot, Robbie tried to ask Kat to the dance, to which she just kept on running away from him. But when Robbie got a date to the dance, Kat got jealous and tried to ruin Robbie's night. It's sort of a retread of the prom wrecker episode where Robbie wanted to go to the prom with Kat, but she already had a date. But Robbie wasn't buying it, so he spent the whole night trying to expose Kat and make her feel bad. Kat just wasn't funny in this episode. She was so miserable and jealous. She didn't even want to go to the dance with Robbie. She just didn't want to see Robbie happy with someone else. Like, she's so unlikable in this episode. Plus, I don't care for Kat and Robbie, so them kissing was not a highlight of this episode like it was made out to be. Also, Tori and Andre's yogurt shop plot was uninteresting. This is such a bad episode, and it's a shame that such a good song in Here's to Us was attached to this episode. It feels like a graduation song, so I wish that it was used in the finale instead of here. It was a good song, and usually I add a letter grade or half a letter grade if an episode comes through with a good song, but I just can't hear. It gets an F. This is a bad episode. Episode 21, Robbie sells Rex. This episode is sort of a soft sequel, a soft continuation of Tori Goes Platinum because Mason Thornsmith returns. He originally went to Hollywood Arts for a presentation, but then he got interested in Robbie's puppet that he tried to get him to sell to his son, which eventually happened. But all throughout this episode, Robbie went crazy without Rex, so Tori made this plan to get this little girl that Psychowitz was beefing with to kiss the boy so he would give Rex back, which eventually happened. Then for side plots, Kat was selling her hot burgers. Then there was this random guy throwing flour in everyone's face, and at the end of this episode, it was revealed that he doesn't even go to Hollywood Arts. Alright, so I'm glad that Jade called out Tori's hypocrisy because Tori thought that Robbie had an unhealthy obsession with Rex, and while Tori was saying that, the whole time I was thinking that she literally saved Rex in season 1 when she could have let him go, so I'm glad that Jade called that out. Robbie just needed to get rid of Rex because it is weird and he has other talents outside of ventriloquism. Like, he's nice with the guitar. That seems like enough to be at Hollywood Arts. Plus, Rex just isn't needed anymore. I haven't really got a chance to say this, so I'll say it now. It barely feels like he's in the show anymore, and all of his lines went to Sinjin that's been in a bunch of season 3 episodes. Like, he's kind of getting the treatment that Tebow and Miss Benson got in the later seasons of iCarly when there was a stretch where it seemed like they were in every episode. That's what Sinjin has right now. Robbie used to take Rex everywhere. Now it feels like he's barely around, which is why I didn't feel anything when they were trying to make Robbie selling Rex a sad moment. Like, he's barely even a character anymore. Also, the ending of Robbie getting Rex back just doesn't work because it felt like he grew as a character when he wasn't holding on to Rex all the time. Like, he got to go to a dance with a girl and he got to kiss Kat, and this happened when Rex was fading. So it's just a missed opportunity to solidify Robbie's growth as a character. He just doesn't need the puppet anymore, and he showed that. So the conclusion is bad because the puppet is holding him back as a character, and everything else this episode had to offer wasn't entertaining. Easy F. Episode 22, The Bad Roommate. In this episode, while writing a song to perform for Kojizi, Andre's grandmother annoyed Andre so much that he moved in with Tori and became a bad roommate, just playing music late at night and even eating the infamous Vega family pot pie. Tori and Andre hated each other because of this, but they're forced to work together when Tori unknowingly plays Andre's music for Kojizi and he likes it, but he wants some lyrics. So that happens after Tori gets Andre to focus again by acting like his grandmother, which makes no sense because he left to get away from his grandmother, but he's thriving here under similar circumstances. Anyways, they perform Faster Than Boys for Kojizi, which he liked, but it failed the baby test, so Tori and Andre got an unsatisfying conclusion. Then the rest of the group and Sinjin are in a plot where Jade had a picture of her on the map that looked like she was picking her nose, so she spent all episode trying to get it taken down just for when the picture got retaken, it looked like she was kissing Robbie. Alright, none of this was funny. Also, I try to be sensitive about this stuff because the actress that played Tori has got so much hate for her singing, so I don't want to add to it in any way because she's a great singer. Like, she single-handedly carried some of these iconic songs. Faster Than Boys, however, is not one of them. It's not good. This is not a song that I replay a lot or even seek out. Like, it's just not a high-quality song. So that dragged this episode down for sure, and combined with none of this stuff being funny, that's going to get this episode an F grade. Episode 23, Brain Squeezers. In this episode, Tori gets to be a team captain on this new show called Brain Squeezers, and everyone wants in so much that they go out of their way to please her. This annoys her, so she just picks her team on her own, which is her and the guys. But when she gets to the Brain Squeezers place the next day, Jade, claiming to be Tori, stole her team, which should have been game over for Tori, but she got to gather up the rejects in Sinjin, Kat, and Trina and make another team to compete, which makes no sense. Because the two teams faced off against each other, that means that this is only a 2-team thing. So that means if everything went as planned, Tori and her original team wouldn't have anyone to play against because there wasn't another team that showed up when Tori's reject squad assembled. So I'm guessing that they stole someone else's spot or they didn't show up. It just doesn't make any sense. Anyways, they got asked these quiz questions, and if they didn't know the answer, then they got some type of bad punishment. Then, when Tori's team won the money, they didn't just hand it to her. She had to get it while being restrained on the ground by these big guys. What am I watching? This episode was so random and unfunny. Like, I could tell that the punishments were supposed to be funny, but it just wasn't. It was honestly sad to watch everyone go through all of that pain just for no one to win. So this is not a fun episode. It's going to get an F. Episode 24, The Slap Fight. While working on this short film, everyone gets distracted because Trina has more followers than them, which is embarrassing because she's Trina. Also, it makes no sense because Tori should be famous from performing at the Platinum Music Awards. She should have way more than around 314 followers. The only way that this makes sense is if the slap is Hollywood Arts exclusive, which I have thought for some time. They make it sound like that sometimes. But even then, Tori should still have way more followers. But yeah, this sparked a lot of chaos as they all went around trying to gain as many followers as they could until Sinjin just had to tell them that they shouldn't be worried about that stuff because they're the best students at Hollywood Arts and they have everything they need. So because they wasted all of that time, they had 19 hours to make their short film, which ended up being bad. Although this episode is about gaining followers and Cell Block was about not using technology, this kind of feels like a retread, like another cell phone based competition type of episode. So in theory, the ratings should be similar, but I didn't find this episode to be funny outside of Kat bringing back her old catchphrase of, "What's that supposed to mean?" Reminds me of peak Victorious, which this clearly isn't. I'm going to give this episode an F grade. Episode 25, Star Spangled Tori. In this episode, Tori is stressed about singing the national anthem at this college basketball game, and everyone tells her to not mess up the lyrics, and to her credit, that didn't happen. But she got dragged across the court by a dog, and this embarrassing moment went viral, so Tori had to deal with this until this Chris Berm talk show type of guy gave her a chance to sort of redeem herself and sing whatever song she wanted on his show. But it was actually a trap to embarrass her even more by detonating a fake dog with spaghetti in it onto Tori. So Beck and Andre did some nice work by removing that and putting it behind Chris's chair, giving Tori a happy ending. Then for Kat's plot, she was living at school because her parents were going to be away for a long time with her brother and she didn't want to live with her aunt and uncle. So when Robbie and Jade found this out, they tried to make arrangements for her to which Nona was available, so Kat moved to her house. Kat's plot was basically about setting up some of Sam and Kat and the reason why she lives at Nona's apartment. Regardless of the quality of Sam and Kat, I like this setup here. It's creative and I like this more serious storyline for Kat. And for Tori's plot, I loved watching Beck and Andre be there for Tori by disarming the device, and it felt like the first plotline in a while where it had some actual stakes to it and they're not just messing around. It's a well-crafted plot that has a satisfying conclusion with Tori getting the last laugh and avenging her embarrassment from the college game. Now, something I will say about Bad Boys as a song is that it's a good but not great song, which just matters more here because this is the last song performance of the show, giving it more weight. It's not a horrible song to end on, but it wasn't their best, and that's something that I always keep in mind when thinking about how good Victorious actually was. But yeah, in the original rankings, I just spammed frown faces for these last, say, 14 or so episodes, and this guy that I used to talk Victorious with all the time said that he agrees with everything except for Star Spangled Tori getting a low rating because it felt like the most normal and classic episode out of the final stretch. Shortly after releasing that video, I actually agreed, and watching it again now just further backs it up. Like, after seeing all of the craziness and randomness of season 3, this was a nice return to form episode that felt like the original, so it's going to get an A. I have no problems with this episode at all. I just don't want to give it an A+ because it doesn't go above and beyond, especially with the All Right song, but it's still a solid episode. Episode 26, Victorious. In this episode, Sikowitz talks about how everyone got too whiny and lazy, so he challenged them to say yes to everything for the rest of the day, as long as it's legal. So it's yet another competition episode, like Cell Block and the Slap Fight. These episodes are like the Johnny Test racing episodes of Victorious. If I sub the Slap Fight out for Tori and Jade's playdate, I can say that Sikowitz Bet or Dare episodes are also becoming a genre. If you complete this task, you get an A. If you don't complete this task, you're gonna fail. It's just funny how lazy the writing is. Like, it's a retread of a retread. Anyways, this saying yes to everything competition gets everyone into some unexpected situations. The good one being Beck and Sinjin bonding at a drag race, but everything else was bad. I just can't believe that this amazing show in Victorious went out with Andre hanging out with this weird girl, Kat, and Robbie, not having any clothes on and riding home in a trash can despite Sikowitz saying nothing illegal. Then there's Tori, Trina, and Jade running around in cheese costumes. Get off my screen. Maybe if the episode came earlier, it might still get an F, but it just hits even harder because this is the lasting image of them unless they came back for Sam and Kat. But when evaluating Jade and Robbie, I don't take Sam and Kat into account really. It's just this. They just weren't supposed to go out like this, and there should have been a real finale that wrapped everything up nicely. Like, there had to have been plans for another season. I just can't believe that this is how Victorious was supposed to end. But that is all I have to say about this episode. Easy F. Victorious season 3 was different for sure. Regardless of if the episodes were good or not, they totally lost the plot and went away from what the show was originally about. It used to be about a girl thriving at a performing arts school, but in season 3, the school kind of just feels like a set piece, a place that they meet up at every day, rather than it being a big part of the story like in the previous seasons. The performing arts aspect of this show got overshadowed by the randomness that they were going for, and with that, season 3 is where Victorious became a legitimate kids show. Like, the audience that it seemed like they were going for before season 3 seemed to be young teenagers, but season 3 is flat out for children with all of their random equals funny humor and the complete destruction of Kat's character. Once just a ditzy teenager, but now she's a dumb kid and a borderline cartoon character to match the tone of where the show is at this point. And although I eventually gave some of these episodes their credit, like The Breakfast Bunch and Cell Block, because despite being random, I found some humor in them, I've got to say that a lot of these episodes were hit or miss, and they missed a lot when what they have labeled as season 4 started, which is everything after the Blonde Squad episode. I just preferred the more consistent approach of the first 2 seasons. Also, this season had the weakest songs and didn't end with an amazing song, so that's not good for something that's supposed to be their selling point. And I already went over how bad the last episode was, which probably wouldn't be the case if Tori Goes Platinum was the finale, but that wasn't the case, and the season just ended on a bad note. The cancellation of Victorious is always controversial and sometimes even a hostile topic. There's just a bunch of different stories floating around, and I've never got a concrete confirmed reason as to why the show was canceled. But regardless of the reason, I don't care that Victorious got canceled. Like, it's not something to get worked up over. just looking at how the show ended, it just wasn't in a great place and they were clearly running out of ideas. A proper finale would have been nice, but I never needed a whole nother season of Victorious in the state that it was in, so it's nice that they quit there. But yeah, that is all I have to say about season 3. And that's every episode of Victorious rated. This was a fun show. Now, that's not to say that it was flawless, because season 3 is a big mark on the overall package. Like, I would have liked to see more sequel episodes with characters or plots that they set up in the previous seasons rather than that randomness, but this was still a solid show. Someone's gonna have to go in last place on the character rankings, but I really enjoyed what everyone brought to the show. And the songs are the highlight of the show. Like, even before I rewatched this show, they've always managed to stick around in my memory for years because they're just that good and they give Victorious the edge over some other shows. Like, some of the episodes were hit or miss, but more times than not, they delivered with their song performances, which was kind of like a good safety net, just in case an episode completely tanked in quality. Like, at least they could somewhat make up for it with a banger song performance. Now, this rewatch didn't change much. I still have it rated just about the same among all of the other Nickelodeon and Disney type shows that I watched, but this was a fun rewatch that I've been trying to put together for years, and I'm glad that I finally got the chance to make this video. But yeah, that is all for now.